The blood-red sun sank below the jagged horizon as Abigail Foster stared down the barrel of a revolver, her heart thundering in her chest like a spooked Mustang. This wasn't how she'd imagined her journey to Arizona Territory would end face to face with death on the dusty main street of Tucson in the summer of 1878. "Lower that weapon," came a deep voice from behind her would-be killer. "Unless you fancy wearing your guts for garters." The outlaw's eyes widened, but he didn't turn. "This ain't your fight, stranger." "It became my fight when you pulled iron on a lady," the voice replied, steady as bedrock. "Now I won't ask again." The tension stretched like taffy before the outlaw slowly lowered his gun, spat in the dirt, and backed away. "Another time, Miss Foster." Only when he disappeared around the corner did Abigail release her breath and turn to face her rescuer. He stood tall against the fading light, a silhouette crowned by a wide-brimmed hat, shoulders broad beneath a dust-covered duster. As he stepped closer, his features came into focus, a strong jaw shadowed with stubble, eyes the color of whiskey, and a mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. "Lucas Wyatt," he introduced himself with a tip of his hat. "Seems you've made yourself some enemies, madam." "Abigail Foster," she replied, her voice steadier than her knees. "And that wasn't an enemy. That was my late husband's business partner." Lucas's eyebrow arched. "Peculiar way to conduct business. He believes I stole something that belongs to him." She brushed dust from her skirts, aware of the curious eyes watching from the boardwalk. "Something I have no intention of returning. And did you steal it, I mean?" Abigail met his gaze squarely. "My husband stole it first, from orphaned children who had nothing else." Something flickered in Lucas's eyes, interest, perhaps, or recognition of a kindred spirit. "Sounds like a story that might be worth hearing." "Perhaps," she conceded, "but not here in the street. I've caused enough spectacle for one day." He nodded toward a building with a painted sign reading "Silver Dollar Saloon." "I know the owner. Private table in back, decent whiskey, no questions asked." Abigail hesitated only a moment. The man had saved her life, and she was short on allies in this dust-blown corner of the territory. "Lead the way, Mr. Wyatt." Inside the saloon, beneath the haze of tobacco smoke and the tinny notes of a piano, Lucas guided her to a corner table shielded from prying eyes. He ordered whiskey for himself, and after a questioning glance that she answered with a nod, one for her as well. "Now," he said when they were settled, "perhaps you'd care to explain why a well-dressed Eastern lady is dodging bullets in Tucson." Abigail took a small sip of whiskey, welcoming the burn. "I came from Boston after my husband died. Franklin Foster, perhaps you've heard of him." "He made his fortune in mining investments." Lucas shook his head. "Can't say that I have. 6 months ago, he was found dead in his office. Everyone called it apoplexy, but I had my suspicions." She traced the rim of her glass with one finger. 2 weeks after the funeral, I discovered ledgers hidden in his study. They detailed money he'd embezzled from a trust fund established for orphaned children of miners killed in a collapse at the Silvercrest mine near a settlement called Pyramid City. Lucas's expression hardened. "I know of it." "Worst disaster these parts had seen in years. Happened in '74. Yes, my husband and his partner, Victor Holloway, the man you met in the street, established a charitable trust for the children. Very public, very generous." Her voice took on a bitter edge. "Except most of that money never reached those children. Instead, it went to purchase mining rights elsewhere. And Holloway wants those ledgers. He wants them destroyed. Without them, there's no proof of the theft. The orphans remain destitute, and he keeps his reputation." She met Lucas's gaze. "I intend to deliver these documents to the territorial judge in Pyramid City and see justice done." Lucas studied her for a long moment. "That's Holloway's territory. He owns half the businesses there, has the sheriff in his pocket. Then I'll find another way." Her chin lifted. "Those children deserve better." "They do," he agreed quietly. He drained his whiskey, set the glass down with purpose. "I'm riding to Pyramid City tomorrow. Stage won't make it through a patchy activity along the route, but I know paths the stage doesn't take." Hope flickered in Abigail's chest. "Are you offering escort, Mr. Wyatt?" "Seems I am." "Why would you help a stranger?" His eyes grew distant. Let's just say I understand what it means to be a child with no one to speak for you. He refocused on her. We leave at dawn. Pack light, wear practical clothes. It's 3 days hard riding if we're lucky. I'll be ready, she promised. Lucas nodded once, then stood. Get some rest, Miss Foster. Tomorrow won't be gentle. As he walked away, Abigail wondered if she was being foolish, trusting this taciturn stranger with her life. But something in his eyes when she'd mentioned the orphans told her more about Lucas Wyatt than words ever could. And for the first time since arriving in this harsh territory, she felt the faintest stirring of hope. Dawn had barely kissed the eastern sky when Abigail arrived at the livery stable. She'd traded her fashionable dress for a split riding skirt and sturdy blouse, her city boots for well-worn leather. Her honey blonde hair was secured in a practical braid, and a wide-brimmed hat shielded her face from the already warming air. Lucas was already there, securing provisions to a sturdy packhorse. His own mount, a powerful black stallion, watched her approach with intelligent eyes. Beside them stood a dappled gray mare. She's gentle but sure-footed, Lucas said, nodding toward the mare. She'll serve you well. Abigail approached the horse, offering her hand for inspection before gently stroking the velvety nose. She's beautiful. Can you ride? I grew up in Virginia before my parents moved to Boston. Horses were my first love. She smiled at the mare. What's her name? Doesn't have one that I know of. She's a rental. Abigail studied the horse's soft eyes. Then I'll call her Athena, goddess of wisdom and strategy, something we'll need plenty of. A ghost of a smile touched Lucas's lips. Fitting. He helped her secure her small trunk to the packhorse, then frowned at its weight. What's in here besides clothes, the ledgers, and books? At his raised eyebrow, she added defensively, I can't abide idle hours without reading material. He shook his head but said nothing more as he helped her mount. Soon they were leaving Tucson behind, the town shrinking behind them as they rode northeast toward the towering mountains that marked the beginning of their journey. They traveled in companionable silence as the morning progressed, the landscape changing from flat desert to rolling hills dotted with scrub and cactus. The sun climbed higher, but Abigail found the heat less oppressive than in town. Out here, at least, there was movement and purpose. Near midday, they stopped beside a small creek to water the horses and rest. Lucas produced jerky and hardtack from his provisions, which they ate in the shade of a stunted cottonwood. You mentioned Virginia, Lucas said unexpectedly. Whereabouts? Shenandoah Valley. My father bred horses on a small farm until the war. She sipped water from her canteen. We lost everything. Father took a position with a shipping company in Boston afterward. Lucas nodded. The war changed many things. You fought, cavalry, Texas regiment. He didn't elaborate. And after? He shrugged, drifted, tried ranching in Kansas for a spell, did some scouting for the army, bounty hunting when times were lean. And now I'm escorting a stubborn Eastern lady through dangerous territory. There was no heat in his words, just the hint of amusement. I'm not as delicate as I appear, Mr. Wyatt. Never suggested you were. A delicate woman wouldn't be chasing justice through a patchy country with a target on her back. He stood, dusting off his trousers. And it's Lucas. Mr. Wyatt was my father, and he was no friend of mine. Before she could respond, he was checking the horse's girths and preparing to move on. Abigail found herself intrigued by this man of few words who revealed so little yet said so much in what he kept silent. They rode until dusk, making camp in a sheltered hollow near another small creek. Lucas efficiently set about building a small, smokeless fire while Abigail tended to the horses. When she returned, he was preparing a simple meal of beans and salt pork. Not what you're used to, I expect, he commented as he handed her a tin plate. During the war, we were lucky to have anything at all. She accepted the food gratefully. This is a feast compared to some meals I've had. They ate in silence for a time, the crackling of the fire and night sounds of the desert their only companions. Tell me about these orphans, Lucas said suddenly. Abigail set her plate aside. 27 children lost fathers in that collapse. Some lost both parents as mothers worked as laundresses or cooks for the mining camp. The oldest is now 16, the youngest just 5. Where are they now? Most were taken in by other families, though those families had little enough themselves. Others. She sighed. There's a makeshift orphanage run by a widow named Mrs. Grayson. The conditions are deplorable, not through any fault of hers. She does what she can with what little they have. Lucas's jaw tightened, and the money that should have provided for them, nearly $30,000. Abigail's voice hardened, enough to provide proper care, education, perhaps even a future for those children. And your husband took it all, he and Holloway. Used it to secure rights to a silver mine in Colorado that's now producing handsomely. She met his gaze across the fire. I didn't know, Lucas, not until after he died. I would never have. I believe you. His interruption was gentle but firm. Some men keep their darkest deeds from those closest to them. Still, I should have seen something, questioned where the money came from. She stared into the flames. I was comfortable in my ignorance. And now you're risking your life to make it right. That counts for something. Abigail looked up at him, warmed by more than just the fire. Thank you for that and for helping me. Lucas nodded once, then began banking the fire for the night. Get some sleep. I'll take first watch. You expect trouble out here, always. He checked his Winchester repeater before settling against a boulder with a clear view of their surroundings. But right now, I'm more concerned about Holloway's men than Apache is. He had time to send riders ahead while we were preparing to leave. Abigail shivered despite the lingering warmth of the day. You think he's that determined? $30,000 and his reputation? Yes, Lucas's expression was grim in the fading firelight. Sleep with your revolver close, Miss Foster. Abigail, she corrected. If I'm to use your Christian name, you should use mine. Something almost like a smile touched his lips. Abigail then, sleep. I'll wake you if there's trouble. She settled into her bedroll, the hard ground beneath her so different from her feather bed in Boston. Yet despite the discomfort and danger, there was something exhilarating about lying beneath the vast canopy of stars, with only a taciturn cowboy and her own determination standing between her and those who would do her harm. Abigail woke to Lucas gently shaking her shoulder. The sky was still dark, stars brilliant in the blackness. It's time, he whispered. We need to move before first light. They broke camp quickly and silently, loading the horses and erasing signs of their presence. By the time the eastern sky showed the first hints of gray, they were already 2 miles from their campsite, following a narrow trail that wound through increasingly rocky terrain. There's a canyon ahead, Lucas explained as they rode. Narrow passage, hard to find if you don't know it's there. Makes a good shortcut, but it's also a good place for an ambush. Yet we're taking it. We don't have much choice if we want to reach Pyramid City before Holloway's men catch up to us. He glanced back at her. Stay close, keep your eyes open, and be ready to run if I tell you. The canyon was as treacherous as Lucas had suggested, a winding slash through towering rock walls that barely allowed 2 riders to pass abreast. Shadows clung to the depths, even as morning sun lit the upper reaches, and the air was cool and damp compared to the desert they'd left behind. They were halfway through when Lucas suddenly reined in, his hand going to his holster. What is it? Abigail whispered, her own hand moving to the small revolver tucked in her belt. Lucas pointed silently to fresh hoofprints in the damp sand of the canyon floor. 4 horses. Passed through not more than an hour ago. Holloway's men, maybe. He dismounted and examined the tracks more closely. One's carrying extra weight supplies, probably. They're moving fast. He looked up at the canyon walls, considering, we could backtrack, find another route. How much time would that cost us? A day, maybe more. Abigail straightened in her saddle. Then we go forward. I won't let Holloway reach that judge first. Lucas studied her for a moment, then nodded. Stay behind me. If shooting starts, find cover and stay down. They continued more cautiously now, Lucas's rifle across his saddle, Abigail's revolver in her hand rather than her belt. The canyon narrowed further, then began to widen as they approached its end. Sunlight spilled down the walls ahead, promising open ground. They were 20 yards from the exit when the first shot rang out. Down, Lucas shouted, already diving from his saddle as a bullet kicked up dust where he'd been sitting. Abigail followed his lead, abandoning Athena and scrambling toward a tumble of boulders on the canyon floor. More shots echoed off the canyon walls, creating a deafening cacophony. From her position, Abigail could see 3 men positioned at the canyon's mouth, using the natural stonework as cover while they fired into the passage. Lucas was behind a larger boulder several yards away, returning fire with measured shots from his Winchester. "Stay down," he called to her between shots. "They're trying to pin us here." As if to prove his point, one of the men began working his way along the canyon wall, trying to gain a better angle on their position. Lucas tracked him with his rifle but couldn't get a clear shot. Abigail checked her revolver 5 shots, and she'd need to make them count. She wasn't a stranger to firearms. Her father had insisted she learn after the war left Virginia crawling with desperate men and painful memories. Still, target practice was a far cry from shooting at living men. The flanking attacker was getting closer, moving from cover to cover with practiced efficiency. If he succeeded, he'd have a clear line of fire to Lucas's position. Taking a deep breath, Abigail steadied her arm against the boulder and waited for the man to move to his next position. When he darted forward, she squeezed the trigger twice in rapid succession. The first shot missed, but the second caught him in the thigh. He went down with a shout of pain, scrambling back toward better cover. Lucas gave her a quick, appreciative nod before turning his attention back to the remaining attackers, who were now focusing more of their fire on Abigail's position. "We need to move," he called to her. "When I give the word, run for those rocks to your right." She nodded, gathering herself for the dash. Lucas fired 3 rapid shots, forcing the attackers to duck behind cover. Now, Abigail ran, keeping low, her heart pounding in her ears. A bullet whined past her ear as she dove behind the new shelter, a narrow crevice in the canyon wall that offered better protection than the boulders. Lucas was moving too, but in the other direction, working his way closer to the canyon mouth. His strategy became clear: divide the attacker's attention, create confusion. One of the men broke cover to get a better shot at Lucas and paid for it with a bullet to the chest. He fell without a sound, leaving only 2 adversaries. The wounded man had recovered enough to resume firing, though his shots went wide. The third man, apparently realizing the tide had turned, began retreating toward where their horses must be tethered. "He's running," Abigail called. Lucas nodded grimly, then fired a careful shot. The fleeing man stumbled, clutched his shoulder, but kept going. His wounded companion provided covering fire as he disappeared around the bend. After a tense minute with no further shots, Lucas called out, "Holloway's man, you're outgunned and your friends abandoned you. Throw out your weapon and you can ride away from this." A silence, then the clatter of a gun being tossed onto rocky ground. "Don't shoot, I'm coming out." The man emerged, limping badly, hands raised. Blood darkened his pant leg where Abigail's bullet had found its mark. Lucas kept his rifle trained on the man as he approached. "Who sent you?" "You know damn well who. Holloway wants the woman and whatever she's carrying." The man's eyes flickered to Abigail with undisguised hatred. "Said she stole something valuable." "Seems to me she's returning something stolen," Lucas replied coolly. "Your horse still nearby?" The man nodded. "Then get on it and ride. Tell Holloway if he sends more men after her, they won't get off as easy as you did." The man looked like he wanted to argue but thought better of it. He retrieved his weapon, emptied of ammunition by Lucas, and limped toward the canyon exit. Only when he was gone did Abigail emerge from her shelter, legs shaking with fading adrenaline. That was merciful. Lucas was checking their horses, which had fortunately not strayed far. Killing him wouldn't have stopped Holloway. This way he delivers a message. And the other one who escaped, he'll warn Holloway we're coming. That works in our favor. The judge will still be in Pyramid City rather than waylaid on the road. He helped Abigail mount Athena, his hand lingering briefly on her arm. "You handled yourself well back there." She managed a shaky smile. "I surprised myself, to be honest. Good shooting." He swung onto his own horse. "We should push hard now, make up ground while they're licking their wounds." They rode out of the canyon into bright sunshine, leaving the echoes of gunfire behind them. Abigail felt changed somehow, as if the woman who had entered that narrow passage wasn't quite the same as the one who emerged. She had taken aim at a man, had wounded him, might even have killed him had her shot been a few inches different. The thought should have horrified her, yet all she felt was a calm certainty that she had done what was necessary. Lucas set a grueling pace for the remainder of the day, stopping only briefly to rest the horses and take hasty meals. By nightfall, they had covered twice the distance of the previous day, but at a cost. Abigail's body ached from the punishing ride, and even Lucas showed signs of fatigue as they made camp in a small grove of juniper trees. No fire tonight, he decided, scanning the darkening landscape. Cold food and an early start tomorrow. They ate dried beef and hardtack in the gathering darkness, their only light the brilliant sweep of stars overhead. The night was cooler than the previous one, a reminder that they were climbing steadily in elevation. How much farther to Pyramid City? Abigail asked, wrapping her blanket more tightly around her shoulders. If we maintain this pace, we'll reach it by tomorrow evening. Lucas passed her his canteen. The judge usually holds court on Fridays. That gives us one day to spare, assuming he keeps to his schedule. And if Holloway's men are waiting for us, then we find another way. His voice was matter-of-fact, as if navigating dangers was simply a part of existence rather than extraordinary circumstances. Perhaps for him, it was. Abigail studied his profile in the starlight, the strong line of his jaw, the straight nose, the watchful eyes that seemed to miss nothing. "Who are you, Lucas Wyatt? Really?" He turned to look at her, surprise evident in his expression. "What do you mean?" "Most men wouldn't risk their lives for a stranger's cause. Yet here you are, guiding me through wilderness, defending me from attackers, all for orphans you've never met." Lucas was silent for so long that Abigail thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but clear in the quiet night. "I was 7 when my mother died. My father was not a kind man, especially when he drank, which was most days." He stared into the darkness beyond their camp. "One night he beat me so badly I couldn't walk. Left me on the floor and went to the saloon. A neighbor found me, took me to the local doctor." Abigail's heart constricted, but she remained silent, sensing he needed to tell this story in his own way. "When my father discovered I was gone, he came looking, dragged me home." Lucas's hand unconsciously moved to his side where Abigail imagined old scars remained. "That night I prayed for anyone to help me. No one came. I'm so sorry," she whispered. He shrugged. "When I was 12, I ran away. Worked as a stable boy, ranch hand, whatever kept me fed. Lied about my age to join the cavalry when the war came." His eyes met hers. "So you see, I know what it is to be a child with no advocate, if I'd had someone fighting for me the way you're fighting for these children." He let the thought go unfinished. Impulsively, Abigail reached out and touched his hand. "Thank you for telling me." He looked down at her hand on his, then gently turned his palm up to clasp her fingers. The simple touch felt momentous somehow, as if some barrier between them had fallen away. "We should rest," he said after a moment, releasing her hand. "Long day tomorrow." As Abigail settled into her bedroll, she found herself thinking of Lucas as a boy, alone and afraid, praying for rescue that never came. It made his willingness to help her cause all the more meaningful and her determination to succeed all the stronger. Morning arrived with a chill mist that clung to the junipers and dampened their clothes as they prepared to depart. They ate quickly and in silence, both aware that this day's journey would bring them closer to confrontation with Holloway. The terrain grew increasingly mountainous as they rode, the trail winding through pine forests and across rocky slopes. By midday, they could see the sprawling valley where Pyramid City nestled, named for the distinctive pyramid-shaped mountain that loomed above it. "There it is," Lucas said, reining in at a vantage point overlooking the valley. "Pyramid City. Founded after silver was discovered in 69. Boomed when the railroad came through in 72. From this distance, it looked peaceful, a cluster of buildings surrounded by smaller homesteads and ranches, with the silver mines visible as scars on the mountainsides. Smoke rose from chimneys, and even from here, they could make out the movement of wagons and riders on the main thoroughfare. "It's larger than I expected," Abigail remarked. "Second biggest settlement in the territory now. The mines are still producing, and the railroad makes it a natural shipping point." Lucas pointed to a large building near the center of town. "That's the courthouse. Judge Harmon holds sessions there, and where would Holloway be? That big house on the hill overlooking the town." Man likes to remind everyone he's above them in more ways than one. There was disgust in Lucas's voice. "He owns the largest hotel, the bank, and most of the businesses on the main street." Abigail studied the town, trying to formulate a plan. "We can't simply ride in." "Holloway will have men watching for us." "Agreed," Lucas considered for a moment. "There's a back trail that leads past the widow Grayson's place, the orphanage you mentioned. We could approach from that direction, less conspicuous." "I'd like to see the orphanage anyway." "Meet the children. This money should have helped," Lucas nodded. "Then that's our plan. We'll circle around, approach from the northeast after dark." They descended from their vantage point and followed a little-used trail that skirted the main approaches to the town. The sun was beginning its western decline when they crested a small ridge and saw a weathered two-story house set back among a stand of cottonwoods. "That's the orphanage," Lucas said quietly. It was a forlorn sight, a once grand farmhouse now fallen into disrepair. The paint was peeling, shutters hung askew, and the small garden looked barely tended. Yet there were signs of life: laundry flapping on a line, a crude swing hanging from a cottonwood branch, a thin spiral of smoke from the chimney. As they approached, children's voices carried on the breeze a mixture of laughter and chatter that made Abigail's heart ache. These were the ones whose futures had been stolen, first by tragedy and then by greed. They were halfway down the slope when a rifle shot cracked the air, kicking up dirt several feet in front of them. "That's far enough," called a woman's voice, firm despite its age. "State your business or turn around." Lucas raised his hands slowly. "Mrs. Grayson, my name is Lucas Wyatt. I've brought someone who wants to help the children." There was a pause then. "Approach slowly, just the two of you." They did as instructed, keeping their hands visible. As they drew closer to the house, Abigail could see a gray-haired woman standing on the porch, a Winchester held with the comfortable familiarity of long practice. "Mrs. Grayson," Abigail called, "my name is Abigail Foster. My late husband was involved with the trust fund established for these children after the mine collapse." The woman's eyes narrowed. "Foster, Franklin Foster's widow?" "Yes, may we speak privately?" Mrs. Grayson studied them for a long moment, then lowered her rifle. "Come inside. Children, back to your chores." Only then did Abigail notice the small faces peering from windows and around the corner of the house, children of various ages, all watching with wary curiosity. The interior of the orphanage was clean but spartanly furnished. Mrs. Grayson led them to a small parlor where a fire burned low in the grate, taking the edge off the mountain evening's chill. "You'll forgive the welcome," the older woman said as she set the rifle aside. "We've had trouble with Holloway's men harassing us, trying to force us out so he can sell this property to the mining company for expansion." "It's a reasonable precaution," Lucas assured her. Mrs. Grayson turned her attention to Abigail. "Now, Mrs. Foster, what brings you all the way from Boston to our humble establishment?" "The trust fund your husband managed has provided precious little these past years. That's why I'm here." Abigail briefly explained about finding the ledgers, discovering the embezzlement, and her journey to bring the evidence to Judge Harmon. "The money that should have supported these children was stolen, Mrs. Grayson. I intend to see it restored with interest." The older woman's expression shifted from suspicion to cautious hope. "That would be a miracle for these children. Many of them have nothing, no family, no prospects beyond working in the same mines that killed their fathers as soon as they're old enough." "How many are still with you?" Lucas asked. 11. "The others were taken in by relatives or other families, though some of those arrangements haven't lasted." She sighed. 3 were sent back last month when their foster family could no longer feed them." A small sound at the parlor door drew their attention. A young boy, perhaps 6 years old, stood watching them with solemn eyes. "Daniel," Mrs. Grayson said gently. "What is it?" "I heard talking," the child said. "Are they taking more of us away?" The raw fear in his voice made Abigail's throat tighten. She knelt to the boy's level. "No, Daniel. We've come to help, not to take anyone away." He regarded her suspiciously. "That's what the other man said. Then Jimmy and Sarah never came back." Mrs. Grayson explained softly. "A man claiming to represent a charitable society in Denver took 2 of our older children 3 months ago. Promised education opportunities. We've heard nothing since." Lucas's expression darkened. "Holloway, I suspect as much, but can't prove it. The territorial authorities aren't interested in investigating." "They will be after tomorrow," Abigail promised. "But tonight we need a safe place to stay. Holloway's men are watching for us." Mrs. Grayson nodded decisively. "You'll stay here. There's a room in the back, used to be the housekeeper's quarters. Not fancy, but private. We can bring your horses around to the old stable where they won't be seen from the road." "Thank you," Lucas said. "We'll compensate you for the trouble." "No need. Any enemy of Holloway's is a friend of ours." She turned to the boy. "Daniel, go tell Miss Jenkins we have guests for supper. Then help Mr. Cooper bring in their horses." The boy nodded and scampered off, his earlier fear apparently forgotten in the excitement of a task. As they settled into the orphanage, Abigail found herself drawn to the children. They were a solemn group for the most part, with the wariness of those who had learned early that life offered few guarantees. Yet there were moments of childish joy, too. A game of marbles in the hallway, a girl proudly showing off a doll with mismatched button eyes, 2 boys arm wrestling at the kitchen table. Supper was simple but filling, a hearty stew with what vegetables the garden could provide, cornbread baked that morning, and weak tea sweetened with the last of the honey. The children ate with the focused attention of those who had known hunger, though Mrs. Grayson ensured each had a fair portion. After the meal, as the youngest children were being shepherded to bed, Abigail retrieved the ledgers from her trunk. She and Lucas sat at the kitchen table with Mrs. Grayson, going over the damning evidence. $30,000, the older woman breathed, running a finger down a column of figures. "Do you know what we could do with even a fraction of that? Proper beds, warm clothes for winter, books for schooling. If Judge Harmon rules in our favor, you'll have it all and more," Abigail promised. "The mine in Colorado that they purchased with these stolen funds has been extremely profitable. With proper accounting, the Children's Trust should be worth close to $50,000 now." Mrs. Grayson's eyes filled with tears. It would change everything for them, give them futures beyond becoming miners or wives to miners. Lucas, who had been quiet during the discussion, suddenly asked, "These 2 children who were taken, Jimmy and Sarah, do you have descriptions? Names of family, if any?" "James Winters and Sarah Coleman. Both 14. Jimmy's father was a foreman in the mine. Sarah's parents both worked there, her mother as a cook for the mining camp." Mrs. Grayson frowned. "Why do you ask?" "Just trying to understand the full scope of Holloway's actions." But something in his tone made Abigail think there was more to his interest than he was saying. Later, as they prepared for bed in the small room Mrs. Grayson had provided, Abigail broached the subject. "You think those children are important to the case somehow, don't you?" Lucas hesitated, then nodded. "Jimmy Winters, if he's the son of Foreman Winters, then his father was the one who first reported unsafe conditions in the mine, was reassigned to another shaft the day before the collapse. You think it wasn't an accident, the collapse?" "There were rumors at the time, nothing proven." Lucas checked his revolver before setting it within easy reach of the narrow cot he would use. "But if Holloway took those specific children, he's tying up loose ends," Abigail finished grimly. "We need to find them, one thing at a time. First, we get those ledgers to Judge Harmon, then we deal with the missing children." He sat on the edge of the cot, suddenly looking weary. "We should rest. Tomorrow won't be easy." Abigail took the room's only bed, a simple iron frame with a thin mattress that nonetheless felt luxurious after 2 nights on the ground. Despite the comfort, sleep eluded her. Her mind raced with thoughts of the children she'd met, the enormity of what her husband had done, and the man sleeping just a few feet away, a man who had become far more to her than a hired guide. In the darkest hour of the night, a sound pulled her from her restless thoughts, a child crying. She rose quietly, wrapped her shawl around her shoulders, and followed the sound to a small dormitory where the youngest boys slept. Daniel sat upright in his bed, tears streaming down his face, trying to stifle his sobs with a small fist pressed to his mouth. Abigail approached slowly, not wanting to startle him. "Daniel, what's wrong, dear?" He looked up, surprised to see her. "Bad dream," he whispered, "about the dark place." "What dark place?" She sat gently on the edge of his bed, where Mama and Papa went, in the ground. His lower lip trembled. "Sometimes I dream they're calling for me, but I can't find them." Abigail's heart broke for him. "Oh, Daniel." She opened her arms, and after a moment's hesitation, he crawled into them, his small body shaking with suppressed sobs. "I miss them," he said into her shoulder. "I try to be brave like Mrs. Grayson says, but sometimes I can't help it." "It's all right to miss them," Abigail soothed, stroking his hair, "and it's all right to cry sometimes. Even brave people cry." Really, I cried when my husband died and I was a grown lady." Daniel considered this. "The other boys still call for their mama sometimes too. At night, I hear them." A movement at the doorway caught Abigail's attention. Lucas stood there, watching them with an unreadable expression. "They still call for their mama," he said softly, the words barely carrying across the room. Abigail held Daniel closer, suddenly certain of her purpose in a way she hadn't been before. "Then I'll answer when they do," she whispered. Something shifted in Lucas's gaze, recognition, respect, perhaps even admiration. He nodded once, then disappeared back down the hallway, leaving Abigail to comfort the orphaned child until he drifted back to sleep. When she finally returned to their room, Lucas was sitting by the window, keeping watch over the moonlit yard. "You meant what you said," he observed quietly. "About answering when they call." "Yes." She sat on the edge of her bed, facing him. "I came here seeking justice for nameless orphans, abstract children I'd never met, but now—" She thought of Daniel's tears, the solemn faces at dinner, the worn clothes and careful manners of children who'd learned too young that the world was not kind. "Now they're real to me, and I can't walk away once the ledgers are delivered. They need more than money, they need someone to fight for them." Lucas studied her for a long moment. "You're planning to stay?" It wasn't a question, but Abigail answered anyway. "Yes, someone needs to ensure the trust is properly managed this time, that the funds go where they are intended." She twisted her hands in her lap. "I have nothing waiting for me in Boston, no family, no real home since Franklin died, but here I could make a difference. It won't be easy. Holloway won't surrender without a fight, even with the law against him. I'm discovering I'm rather good at fighting for what matters." She smiled faintly. "I never knew that about myself before." Lucas returned her smile, a rare, full expression that transformed his face. "I knew it the moment you pulled that revolver on Holloway's man in Tucson." The quiet intimacy of the moment stretched between them, broken only when a rooster crowed prematurely in the yard, announcing the approaching dawn. "We should prepare," Lucas said, standing. "Court begins at 9. We'll need to move carefully to avoid Holloway's watchers." They dressed quickly and joined Mrs. Grayson in the kitchen, where she was already preparing breakfast for the household. The plan was simple. Lucas would go ahead to scout the safest route to the courthouse while Abigail followed with the ledgers, using a shawl and bonnet borrowed from Mrs. Grayson to disguise her appearance. As they prepared to leave, the children gathered to see them off. Daniel tugged at Abigail's skirt, looking up at her with those solemn eyes that had seen too much. "Are you coming back?" he asked. Abigail knelt before him. "Yes, Daniel, I promise." He nodded, seemingly satisfied with her answer, and stepped back among his companions. Lucas led the way through a back path that wound behind the main street of Pyramid City, keeping to alleys and service lanes rather than the more visible thoroughfares. The town was already bustling despite the early-hour miners heading to their shifts, shopkeepers opening their establishments, wagons delivering goods. The courthouse stood at the center of town, a two-story brick building with white columns that seemed transplanted from a more genteel setting. Men in suits mingled on the steps, and through the open doors, Abigail could see others gathering in the main hall. Judge Harmon is already in session, Lucas murmured as they paused in the shadow of a neighboring building. Holloway's men will be watching the main entrance. We'll use the side door, it leads directly to the clerk's office. As they approached the side entrance, Abigail clutched the satchel containing the ledgers more tightly. Everything depended on getting these documents to the judge before Holloway could intercept them. The clerk, a nervous man with ink-stained fingers, looked up in surprise when they entered his office. "Can I help you?" he asked, adjusting his spectacles. "We need to see Judge Harmon immediately," Lucas stated. "It's an urgent matter involving evidence of financial crimes." The clerk frowned. "The judge is hearing the Sullivan land dispute. He can't be interrupted unless it involves Victor Holloway," Abigail interjected, "and the embezzlement of funds meant for the orphans of the Silvercrest mine disaster." The clerk's eyes widened. "That's a very serious accusation, madam." "One I can prove," she patted the satchel. "These ledgers contain detailed records of the theft." The man hesitated, glancing toward the door that presumably led to the courtroom. "Mr. Holloway is an important man in this town, and these children have no one but us," Lucas said firmly. "Will you do your duty, sir, or must we find someone who will?" After a moment's internal struggle, the clerk nodded. "Wait here." He disappeared through the door to the courtroom. Minutes stretched like hours as they waited, every sound from the hallway causing them to tense in anticipation of discovery. Finally, the door reopened, and the clerk beckoned them inside. "Judge Harmon will see you in his chambers," he whispered. "Follow me." He led them through a side passage to a handsome office where a white-haired man in judicial robes waited behind a massive oak desk. Judge Harmon had the weathered face of someone who had seen much of life's ugliness, but retained his principles nonetheless. "Mrs. Foster," he greeted her, rising from his seat. "Mr. Wyatt, my clerk tells me you have evidence of malfeasance regarding the Orphans' Trust Fund." "Yes, Your Honor." Abigail placed the ledgers on his desk. "My late husband, Franklin Foster, in partnership with Victor Holloway, embezzled nearly $30,000 meant for the orphans of the Silvercrest disaster. These are the original accounting books, showing both the legitimate transactions and the private ones they kept hidden." The judge opened the ledgers, his expression growing grimmer as he turned the pages. "This appears quite damning, Mrs. Foster, but I must ask, why are you bringing this forward now against your husband's former partner? Surely this implicates your late husband as well." "It does," Abigail acknowledged, "and I cannot undo what he did, but I can try to make it right. Those children deserve the future that was promised to them." Judge Harmon studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll need time to review these properly." In the meantime, the door burst open and Victor Holloway strode in, flanked by the town sheriff and two other men. "What is the meaning of this interruption, Harmon? I was told you suspended court for an emergency." His eyes fell on Abigail and Lucas, and his face contorted with rage. "You. How dare you come here spreading lies?" "Not lies, Mr. Holloway," the judge said calmly, placing a protective hand over the ledgers. "Evidence that I will be examining very carefully." "Whatever she's shown you is forged," Holloway sputtered. "This woman is unbalanced with grief, imagining conspiracies where none exist." "The books speak for themselves," Lucas said, stepping slightly in front of Abigail. "As will the condition of the orphans your charity was supposed to support." Holloway's face reddened further. "Sheriff, arrest these two for slander and theft of private documents." The sheriff, a heavy-set man with a drooping mustache, hesitated. "Mr. Holloway, I can't just— These proceedings will continue properly," Judge Harmon interrupted firmly. "Sheriff, you will escort Mrs. Foster and Mr. Wyatt to secure accommodations where they will remain under the court's protection until I've reviewed this evidence. Mr. Holloway, you will return tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock to answer these charges formally." "This is outrageous," Holloway protested. "I'm the most respected businessman in this town. You can't possibly—" "I can and I will," the judge cut him off. "Unless you'd prefer I issue a warrant for your arrest right now based on a preliminary review of these documents." Holloway fell silent, though his eyes burned with hatred as they fixed on Abigail. "This isn't over," he said quietly, "not by a long shot. For once we agree," she replied steadily. "This is only the beginning." The sheriff led them to a small but comfortable room above the town's only restaurant, explaining apologetically that it was the safest place he could provide on short notice. Two deputies were stationed outside ostensibly for their protection, though Abigail suspected they were as much to prevent their departure as to ward off any threats from Holloway. "You think the judge will act on the evidence?" she asked Lucas when they were alone. "Harmon has a reputation for integrity. It's why he's still alive despite crossing powerful interests in the territory." Lucas checked the room's single window, ensuring it could be opened quickly if needed. "But Holloway won't wait idly for justice to take its course. He'll be planning something. The missing children, Jimmy and Sarah, I can't stop thinking about them." Abigail paced the small room. If Holloway took them to silence them about the mine collapse, then they could be in danger now that we've exposed him. Lucas finished her thought. "But we don't know where to look. And we can't leave this room without risking arrest." A soft knock at the door interrupted their discussion. Lucas motioned for Abigail to stand back as he approached cautiously. "Who is it?" "Message for Mrs. Foster," came a young voice. Lucas opened the door just enough to see a boy of about 12 standing in the hallway, nervously shifting his weight from one foot to another. "Deputies let me through," the boy explained. "Said it was just a delivery." Lucas accepted the folded paper and pressed a coin into the boy's hand before closing the door again. The note was brief and unsigned. "Midnight, back door of restaurant. Come alone if you want to find the missing children." "It could be a trap," Lucas said after reading it. "Or it could be someone who knows what happened to them but is afraid to come forward openly." Abigail took the note, studying the neat handwriting. "Someone educated from the penmanship. I don't like it." Lucas frowned. "In any case, you're not going alone." "But if they won't speak to both of us, then we don't get the information." His tone brooked no argument. "We've come too far to separate now." As midnight approached, they prepared carefully. The deputies outside their door had been changing shifts every 4 hours. The midnight change would provide their opportunity to slip out unnoticed. Sure enough, at 5 minutes to 12, they heard the murmur of voices as one pair of deputies relieved another. Lucas eased open the door to find the hallway momentarily empty as the men compared notes at the staircase. They moved silently to the back stairs that led directly to the restaurant's kitchen. The establishment was closed at this hour, the kitchen dark except for the dying embers in the stove. They navigated by touch until they reached the back door, which opened onto a narrow alley. The night air was cool and damp, stars obscured by clouds that promised rain by morning. For several minutes they waited in silence, watching for any sign of their mysterious correspondent. Finally, a figure emerged from the shadows at the end of the alley, a woman in a plain dress and shawl, her face partially hidden by the darkness. "Mrs. Foster," she called softly. "I'm here," Abigail responded, stepping forward with Lucas close behind her. The woman tensed when she saw Lucas. "The note said to come alone. We come together or not at all," Abigail said firmly. "You can trust him as you trust me." After a moment's hesitation, the woman approached. As she drew closer, Abigail could see she was younger than her bearing had suggested, perhaps 25, with the careworn face of someone who had endured hardship. "My name is Rebecca Winters," she said quietly. "Jimmy Winters is my brother." Lucas straightened. "Foreman Winters' children." She nodded. "Our father tried to warn the company about conditions in the mine. After the collapse, Jimmy was old enough to understand what had happened. He started asking questions, telling anyone who would listen that our father had predicted the disaster. And then he disappeared," Abigail guessed, 3 months ago. "Him and Sarah Coleman both. A man came to the orphanage claiming to represent a charity in Denver, said they'd be given education opportunities." Rebecca's voice broke. "I knew something was wrong. Jimmy would have written to me if he could." "Do you know where they were taken?" Lucas asked. "Not exactly, but I work as a laundress for several households in town, including Holloway's. Last week, I overheard him arguing with someone about those brats at the cabin and how they needed to be dealt with permanently now that his position was threatened. Abigail's blood ran cold. Did he mention where this cabin is located? Somewhere near Crystal Creek, I think. He has mining interests in that area, small claims that aren't part of the main Silvercrest operation. Lucas nodded thoughtfully. I know the region, several abandoned prospector cabins up that way. We have to find them, Abigail said urgently. If Holloway is desperate enough, he is, Rebecca interrupted. After court today, he came home in a rage, broke things, threatened his servants. He knows those ledgers will ruin him. She clutched Abigail's arm. Please, Jimmy is all the family I have left. We'll find them, Lucas promised. But we need to move quickly and quietly. If Holloway suspects, you've spoken to us. I understand the risk. Rebecca straightened her shoulders. My shift at his house begins at 5 tomorrow morning. I can create a distraction if needed, perhaps start a small fire in the laundry room. It would draw attention away from the trail to Crystal Creek. That's too dangerous, Abigail protested. So is doing nothing while my brother and Sarah might be killed to protect a wealthy man's reputation. Rebecca's expression was resolute. I'll do my part, you do yours. After she had gone, melting back into the shadows as silently as she had emerged, Lucas and Abigail returned to their room, careful to avoid the deputies who were now settled into their positions for the night watch. Crystal Creek is at least 3 hours' ride from here, Lucas said as they planned. If we leave before dawn, we might reach it by mid-morning. But how do we get out? The deputies will be dealing with whatever distraction Rebecca creates at Holloway's house. He checked his revolver and began gathering their few possessions. We'll need to move fast once it starts. They managed a few hours of restless sleep before a commotion in the street below woke them. Looking out the window, they saw people pointing toward the hill where Holloway's mansion stood. Smoke was rising from one wing of the building, and even from this distance they could hear shouting. Rebecca, Abigail breathed. She really did it. And there go our guards, Lucas observed as the deputies ran toward the growing crowd drawn by the excitement. Time to move. They slipped out of the room and down the back stairs once more, this time continuing through the alley to the livery stable where their horses had been kept. The stable hand was nowhere to be seen, likely also drawn to the fire, making it simple for them to saddle Athena and Lucas's stallion and ride out of town by a back road that would take them toward Crystal Creek. The morning was misty, the threatened rain holding off but leaving the air heavy with moisture. They pushed their horses as hard as they dared on the rocky trail that wound through pine forests and across mountain meadows still sparkling with dew. Crystal Creek revealed itself as a rushing stream that cut through a narrow valley. Several small cabins dotted its length, most abandoned or occupied only during mining seasons. How will we know which one? Abigail asked as they paused at the valley's entrance, scanning the scattered structures. Lucas pointed to a thin column of smoke rising from the chimney of the most distant cabin. That's our best guess. It's the most isolated, hardest to approach without being seen. They left their horses tethered in a grove of aspens and proceeded on foot, moving carefully from cover to cover. As they drew closer to the cabin, they could make out a figure sitting on the porch, a man with a rifle across his knees, watching the trail with bored vigilance. One guard that we can see, Lucas whispered. Likely more inside. How do we approach? Lucas studied the cabin and its surroundings. There's a window on the back wall. If I create a distraction at the front, you might be able to reach it unseen. And then what? I'm not exactly skilled at breaking and entering. The children will be. If you can get their attention, they might be able to help from inside. He handed her his hunting knife. Use this if needed, but remember the goal is to get the children out safely, not to engage if you can avoid it. The plan was risky but simple. Lucas would circle around and approach from the opposite direction, firing shots into the air to draw the guard away from his post. Abigail would use that opportunity to reach the back of the cabin and attempt to contact the children. As she crept through the underbrush toward the rear of the structure, Abigail's heart pounded so loudly she feared it might give her away. The cabin was small, single-story, with a sagging roof and walls that had weathered too many mountain winters. The back window was shuttered, but not tightly. She could see slivers of the interior through the gaps. From the front of the cabin came the sound of gunshots, followed by shouts of alarm. The guard's footsteps pounded across the porch and down the steps, heading in the direction of Lucas's distraction. Abigail moved quickly to the window, peering through the cracks in the shutters. Inside, she could make out two figures huddled together on a narrow cot, a boy and girl, both thin and frightened-looking but alert at the sound of gunfire. "Jimmy, Sarah," she called softly, tapping on the shutter. "I'm here to help you." Their heads snapped toward the sound, eyes wide with surprise and suspicion. "Who are you?" the boy demanded in a harsh whisper. "My name is Abigail Foster. Rebecca sent me to find you." At the mention of his sister, Jimmy moved cautiously toward the window. "Prove it." "Tell me something only someone who knows Becca would know." Abigail's mind raced. Rebecca had shared so little in their brief meeting. "She works as a laundress. She risked everything to help us find you, including starting a fire at Holloway's mansion this morning." Jimmy's expression softened slightly. "The shutters are nailed closed from the outside. Stand back." Abigail used Lucas's knife to pry at the nails, working as quickly as she dared while keeping an ear out for returning footsteps. More gunshots sounded from the forest, followed by answering fire. Lucas was engaging the guard, buying her time. Finally, the last nail gave way and Abigail pulled the shutter open. The window itself was small, but the children were thin enough to squeeze through. "Sarah first," Jimmy insisted, helping the girl climb onto the sill. Abigail helped her down on the outside, then reached for Jimmy. As he maneuvered through the narrow opening, a shout came from inside the cabin. "They're escaping." Jimmy tumbled through the window just as a shot splintered the wood beside Abigail's head. She pushed the children toward the forest. "Run. That way. My friend is waiting." They fled through the underbrush, pursued by the sound of men crashing through the cabin and onto the porch. More shots rang out, bullets whining through the branches around them. Lucas appeared suddenly beside them, firing back toward the cabin to provide covering fire. "This way," he directed, leading them toward a rocky outcropping that would provide better shelter. They reached the rocks just as the pursuing men broke from the tree line. Lucas positioned Abigail and the children behind the largest boulder, then took up a defensive position. "3 of them," he reported grimly. "All armed." "We need to reach the horses," Abigail said, checking Jimmy and Sarah for injuries. Both were frightened but unharmed. "Can we circle back, not without being seen?" Lucas fired another shot, forcing one of their pursuers to duck behind a tree. "We're pinned here for now." Jimmy, who had been catching his breath, suddenly spoke up. "There's a mine entrance about 100 yards that way." He pointed west toward a ridge. "Old working that connects to the Silvercrest tunnel system. We explored it once before they took us." "Would you remember the way through?" Lucas asked. The boy nodded confidently. "My father was foreman. He showed me all the passages." Lucas considered for a moment, then nodded. "All right. When I give the word, you 3 make for that mine entrance. I'll cover you, then follow." Abigail didn't like the plan. It meant leaving Lucas exposed, but she couldn't see an alternative. "Be careful," she told him, surprising herself by squeezing his hand briefly. His eyes met hers, conveying more than words could in that moment. "Always am." On Lucas's signal, Abigail and the children made a dash for the ridge, keeping low and zigzagging to make themselves harder targets. Behind them, Lucas laid down suppressive fire, forcing their pursuers to keep their heads down. The mine entrance was almost invisible until they were upon it, a dark opening partially concealed by fallen rocks and overgrown vegetation. Jimmy led the way inside without hesitation, Sarah close behind him. Abigail paused at the entrance, looking back anxiously for Lucas. He appeared moments later, running in a crouch, his revolver still in hand. "Inside, quickly," he urged as bullets kicked up dirt around him. The interior of the mine was cool and damp, illuminated only by what little daylight filtered through the entrance. The air smelled of earth and minerals, with an undertone of decay from rotting support timbers. "We need light," Jimmy said practically. He felt along the wall near the entrance until his hand closed around an object. Here old miner's lantern should still have oil. Lucas struck a match, and soon a warm glow spread from the lantern, revealing a narrow tunnel reinforced with timber supports that disappeared into darkness. "Which way?" Abigail asked, glancing nervously toward the entrance where their pursuers would soon appear. Jimmy pointed deeper into the mine. "Main shaft is about half a mile in. From there, we can access tunnels that lead to the other side of the mountain. They won't know which way we've gone." They moved quickly along the tunnel, Jimmy leading with surprising confidence for a boy his age. Sarah remained close to Abigail, occasionally glancing back with fear evident in her large eyes. "It'll be all right," Abigail assured her gently. "We'll get you somewhere safe." "Why did they take you?" Lucas asked the children as they navigated the winding passage. Jimmy's expression darkened. "Because I wouldn't stop talking about what my father said before the collapse. How he reported unsafe conditions, how the company ignored him. Holloway visited the orphanage once, heard me telling the story to some of the younger kids. And Sarah. She was there when it happened," Jimmy explained. "Her mother worked in the office sometimes. She overheard Holloway and my father arguing about the safety reports." Sarah nodded, speaking for the first time. "Mr. Holloway said fixing the supports would cost too much money. Said they'd hold long enough to get the silver out of that section." "They didn't," Jimmy added bitterly. 23 men died because he wanted to save money. The implications were staggering, not just embezzlement but negligence leading to multiple deaths. If proven, Holloway wouldn't just face financial ruin, he could hang. "Did they hurt you?" Abigail asked softly. Both children shook their heads. "Just kept us locked up," Sarah explained. "Said they were waiting for arrangements to send us far away. But last night, one of the men said we wouldn't be leaving after all, that it was too risky now." Lucas and Abigail exchanged a grim look, understanding what had nearly happened. The sound of voices echoing from the tunnel behind them spurred them to move faster. Their pursuers had found the mine entrance and were following. Jimmy led them to a junction where the tunnel branched in 3 directions. "This way," he decided, choosing the leftmost passage. "It's longer but safer. The middle one has a section where the roof collapsed last year." They pressed on, the voices behind them growing fainter as the tunnels created a natural maze. After what seemed like hours but was probably only 40 minutes, Jimmy slowed. "We're almost to the exit on the north side," he whispered. "But there's a problem. It comes out near one of Holloway's active claims. There might be workers there." "What about the other exits?" Lucas asked. "Too far or blocked by cave-ins?" Jimmy bit his lip. "We'll have to risk it." As they approached the exit, daylight once again filtering into the tunnel, Lucas motioned for them to wait while he scouted ahead. He returned moments later, expression grim. 4 men at the mine entrance, armed, not regular miners, Holloway's men waiting for us. "They knew we'd come this way," Abigail realized. "Is there another branch nearby we could take?" Lucas asked Jimmy. The boy thought for a moment. "There's a ventilation shaft about 100 yards back. It's narrow, but it comes out higher on the slope away from the claim." "Show us." They backtracked to find a vertical shaft with rusted iron rungs embedded in the wall, disappearing upward into darkness. "I'll go first," Lucas decided. "Make sure it's clear at the top." He handed the lantern to Abigail. "If I don't return or call down within 10 minutes, find another way out." "Be careful," she said again. And this time he acknowledged her concern with the briefest touch to her cheek before beginning his ascent. The minutes stretched endlessly as they waited in the dim light of the lantern. Jimmy kept watch down the tunnel, alert for any sign of pursuit, while Sarah huddled close to Abigail, drawing comfort from her presence. Finally, Lucas's voice drifted down the shaft. "All clear, send the children up first." Jimmy went first, then Sarah, with Abigail following last after securing the lantern to her belt. The climb was arduous, the rungs slippery with moisture and age, but eventually she emerged into the fresh air of a mountain afternoon. They found themselves on a wooded slope overlooking the valley, the cabin where the children had been held visible in the distance. Holloway's men were still searching the area, unaware that their quarry had escaped in an entirely different direction. "We need to get back to town," Lucas said, helping Abigail brush dust from her clothes. "Judge Harmon needs to hear what these children know about the mine collapse, but our horses, too risky to retrieve now. We'll go on foot to the main road, try to flag down a wagon or rider heading to Pyramid City." They set off through the forest, moving as quickly as the children's strength allowed. Despite their ordeal, both Jimmy and Sarah showed remarkable resilience, pushing forward without complaint even as the hours wore on. By late afternoon, they reached the main road that connected the outlying mining claims to Pyramid City. Fortune smiled upon them as a lumber wagon approached, driven by an elderly man who readily agreed to give them a ride when Lucas explained they'd had trouble with their horses. As they jolted along the road toward town, Abigail found herself seated beside Lucas on the wagon's rough bench, the children dozing on hay bales in the back. "I've been thinking," she said quietly, so only he could hear. "These children need more than just the money from the trust fund. They need someone to ensure it's properly managed this time, someone to advocate for them day to day. Someone like you." There was no judgment in his tone, only understanding. "Yes," she met his gaze directly. "I meant what I said to Daniel. When they call out, someone needs to answer." "I want to be that someone, Lucas." He was silent for a long moment. "Pyramid City isn't Boston. Life here is harder, simpler. I've never felt more alive than I have these past days." She glanced back at the sleeping children, "or more certain of my purpose." A smile touched his lips, genuine and warm. "Then I believe those children are very fortunate indeed." "What about you?" she asked, suddenly anxious about his answer. "When this is over, will you move on, back to your drifting?" His hand found hers on the wagon bench, fingers intertwining with a naturalness that made her heart beat faster. "I've been thinking I might settle for a spell. Pyramid City seems like it could use someone with my particular skills." "And what skills would those be, Mr. Wyatt?" She teased gently. "Protection of those who need it most." His eyes held hers, serious despite his light tone. "If that's a service you might require, Mrs. Foster." The wagon rumbled into Pyramid City as the sun was setting, casting long shadows down the main street. Their arrival caused an immediate stir, not least because the entire town was abuzz with news of the charges against Victor Holloway and the dramatic fire at his mansion. Lucas directed the wagon driver to the courthouse, where Judge Harmon was reportedly still in session despite the late hour. As they helped the now awake children down from the wagon, a familiar figure hurried toward them. "Jimmy," Rebecca Winters cried, gathering her brother into a fierce embrace. Tears streamed down her face as she examined him for injuries, then pulled Sarah into the hug as well. "Thank God. Thank God you're both safe." "How did you know to find us here?" Abigail asked. Word spread that Holloway's men were searching for escaped prisoners in the Crystal Creek area. "I hoped." Rebecca wiped her eyes. "I hoped it meant you'd succeeded." "More than succeeded," Lucas replied, guiding them toward the courthouse steps. "These children have information that will ensure Holloway answers for more than just embezzlement." Inside, they found Judge Harmon in his chambers, looking weary but determined as he reviewed documents spread across his desk. He looked up in surprise as they entered, the clerk announcing them with nervous deference. "Mrs. Foster, Mr. Wyatt, I was told you'd disappeared." His eyes moved to the children. "And who might these young people be?" "James Winters and Sarah Coleman, Your Honor," Abigail explained. "Two of the orphans from the Silvercrest disaster. They were kidnapped on Holloway's orders to prevent them from testifying about what they knew regarding the mine collapse." The judge's eyebrows rose. "Serious accusations indeed, and these children can confirm this?" Jimmy stepped forward, standing straight despite his fatigue. "Yes, sir. My father was foreman. He filed safety reports that Mr. Holloway ignored, then the mine collapsed just like Pa said it would. And I heard them arguing about it," Sarah added softly. "Mr. Holloway said fixing the supports would cost too much." Judge Harmon's expression grew grave. "That would constitute criminal negligence at minimum, manslaughter at worst." He turned to Rebecca. "You're the boy's sister. Can you corroborate any of this?" "I can confirm my father made repeated complaints about conditions in the mine. He kept copies of his reports at home. I still have them. Get them, the judge instructed. Bring them to me first thing tomorrow. What about Holloway? Lucas asked. Has he been taken into custody? Not yet. After the fire at his home this morning, he claimed he needed to assess the damage. Deputies went to escort him to his hearing, but he'd already left. Judge Harmon's mouth set in a grim line. I've issued a warrant for his arrest, but he may have fled the territory. Or he might be desperate enough to eliminate any remaining threats, Abigail said, concern evident in her voice. The children won't be safe until he's apprehended. I've thought of that. The judge rose from his desk. Sheriff Medlock has finally decided where his true duty lies. He's assigned deputies to protect the orphanage and Miss Winters's home. He addressed the children directly. You'll both stay in protective custody here at the courthouse tonight. Tomorrow, we'll formalize your testimony. As they prepared to leave, the judge asked Abigail and Lucas to remain behind. I've reviewed the ledgers thoroughly, he told them when the others had gone. The evidence of embezzlement is irrefutable. Combined with these new allegations about the mine collapse, he shook his head. Holloway will face serious charges when apprehended, and the Children's Trust Fund, Abigail asked, will be restored in full with interest. I've already drafted the necessary orders. He studied her thoughtfully. What happens next will require someone to oversee the proper administration of those funds, someone with both financial acumen and genuine concern for the children's welfare. I'd like to volunteer for that responsibility, Your Honor, the judge smiled slightly. I'd hoped you might say that, Mrs. Foster. It would mean relocating permanently to Pyramid City, of course. I'm aware, it's what I want. Very well, we'll discuss the details once Holloway is in custody. His expression sobered. Which brings me to you, Mr. Wyatt. Sheriff Medlock could use a man with your experience. He's asked if you might consider a deputy's position, at least temporarily. Lucas glanced at Abigail before answering. I believe I might be persuaded to put down roots for a time, Your Honor. Excellent. Report to him in the morning. The judge dismissed them with a nod. Get some rest. Tomorrow promises to be eventful. Outside the courthouse, the evening had deepened into night. Stars glimmered overhead, a celestial canopy that seemed to Abigail both vaster and more intimate than the Boston skies she had known all her adult life. Where will you stay tonight? Lucas asked as they descended the courthouse steps. Mrs. Grayson offered me a room at the orphanage when we spoke earlier, Abigail replied. I'd like to check on Daniel and the others, let them know we found Jimmy and Sarah. Lucas nodded. I'll walk you there. They strolled through the now quiet streets of Pyramid City, the day's excitement having given way to the peace of a mountain night. Lamplight glowed from windows, and somewhere in the distance, the melancholy notes of a harmonica drifted on the cool air. It's strange, Abigail mused as they walked. A week ago, I was a proper Boston widow with nothing but an empty future ahead of me. Now, she gestured at the town around them, now I feel as though I've found my purpose. Sometimes life takes unexpected turns, Lucas said. The trick is recognizing the right path when it appears before you. And have you recognized yours, Lucas Wyatt? She stopped walking to look up at him, her heart suddenly racing. He turned to face her, and in the lamplight from a nearby window, she could see the warmth in his eyes. I believe I have. Slowly, giving her every chance to step away, he raised a hand to her cheek. If you'll allow me to walk it alongside you. Abigail leaned into his touch, her own hand coming up to cover his. I can think of nothing I'd welcome more. Their first kiss was gentle, a question and answer exchanged in the language of touch rather than words. When they finally drew apart, both were smiling with the wonder of new beginnings. I should get you to the orphanage, Lucas said, though he made no move to continue walking. Yes, you should, Abigail agreed, equally reluctant to break the moment. The sound of running footsteps shattered the quiet. They turned to see one of Sheriff Medlock's deputies hurrying toward them, face grim in the lamplight. Mr. Wyatt, Mrs. Foster, thank God I found you. He stopped, catching his breath. It's Holloway. He's at the orphanage, armed. The world seemed to stop for an instant, then rush forward at terrifying speed. Without a word, Lucas and Abigail broke into a run, the deputy close behind them. How many children are there? Lucas called over his shoulder as they ran. 11 plus Mrs. Grayson and her assistant, the deputy answered. Sheriff's already there with 2 men, but Holloway's barricaded himself inside with the children. Abigail's heart pounded with more than exertion. Daniel. The solemn-eyed boy who still called for his mother in the night. All those children who had already lost so much, now facing a desperate, cornered man with nothing left to lose. When they reached the orphanage, they found Sheriff Medlock directing his men to take positions around the property. The building was dark except for a single lamp burning in the front parlor, where a shadow occasionally passed before the window. "What's the situation?" Lucas asked, approaching the sheriff. "Holloway broke in about 20 minutes ago. Mrs. Grayson's assistant was outside and ran for help." Medlock looked grim. "He's got all the children and Mrs. Grayson in the parlor. Says he'll start shooting if anyone tries to enter." "What does he want?" Abigail asked, her voice tight with fear. "Safe passage out of the territory, and the ledgers you brought to Judge Harmon." Lucas shook his head. "Even if we gave him those things, he'd never make it across the border, not with these charges against him." "He's not thinking rationally," the sheriff agreed. "Man's cornered and knows it." Abigail stared at the darkened orphanage, thinking of the children inside. Of Daniel, who had asked if she was coming back. She had promised him she would. "Let me talk to him," she said suddenly. Both men turned to her in surprise. "Absolutely not," Lucas said firmly. "He wants the ledgers. I'm the one who brought them forward." "Maybe I can convince him to let the children go in exchange for me." "Mrs. Foster, that's," the sheriff began. "Our best chance," she interrupted. "He's desperate, not stupid. He knows harming children will only make things worse for him. But an exchange me for them might seem reasonable in his current state." Lucas gripped her arm. "Abigail, no, it's too dangerous." She covered his hand with hers. "Those children need someone to answer when they call, Lucas. I promised I would be that someone." Their eyes locked in silent communication, his pleading, hers resolute. Finally, he sighed. "At least let me try to get into position at the back of the house. If something goes wrong—" "All right," she agreed, "but give me your word you won't do anything rash. I won't let him hurt you." "That's the only promise I can make." It was enough. It had to be. While Lucas circled around to the rear of the orphanage, Abigail approached the front door, Sheriff Medlock and his deputies providing cover from a distance. "Mr. Holloway," she called clearly. "It's Abigail Foster." "I want to talk." Silence stretched for several heartbeats, then Holloway's voice came through the closed door. "Come closer, alone, where I can see you." Abigail moved to the foot of the porch steps, her hands visible at her sides. "I'm unarmed, Mr. Holloway. I just want to ensure the children's safety." "Bit late for concern about their welfare, isn't it?" His voice was bitter. "You've destroyed everything I built, my reputation, my business, my future. You destroyed those things yourself when you stole from orphaned children and caused the deaths of their fathers," she replied steadily. "But it's not too late to avoid making things worse." The door opened a crack, just enough for the barrel of a revolver to become visible. "Come inside," slowly. Abigail ascended the steps with deliberate calm, though her heart raced beneath her composed exterior. As she entered the parlor, the scene before her made her breath catch. The children were huddled together on one side of the room, Mrs. Grayson standing protectively before them. Daniel's eyes found Abigail's immediately, wide with fear but also recognition she had come back, as promised. Holloway stood by the fireplace, revolver in hand, his once immaculate appearance now disheveled. A wild look in his eyes suggested he had been drinking. "Mrs. Foster," he greeted her with mocking courtesy. "Come to save the little orphans? How noble. I've come to offer you a deal, Mr. Holloway." Abigail kept her voice steady. "Let the children and Mrs. Grayson go. Take me instead as your insurance for safe passage." He laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "And why would I do that? These children are far more valuable as hostages. No one wants to see harm come to innocent little ones. Because I'm the one who brought the ledgers to Judge Harmon. I'm the one who can testify most effectively against you. The children are simply victims. You gain nothing by holding them." Holloway seemed to consider this, his eyes never leaving her face. "And if I agree, what guarantee do I have that I'll be allowed to leave once they're gone? You have my word, and Sheriff Medlock's." He's agreed to give you a horse and 6 hours head start toward the territorial border. It was a lie, of course, but one she hoped Holloway was desperate enough to believe. He studied her for a long moment, calculation replacing some of the wildness in his gaze. Very well. The old woman and the children can go, but you stay, and if anyone tries to follow us when we leave, you'll die first. Abigail nodded, relief flooding her despite the personal danger. Mrs. Grayson, please take the children now, quickly. The older woman hesitated only briefly before gathering the children. Everyone hold hands, she instructed, her voice remarkably calm. Stay together and move directly to the door. As the children filed past, Daniel broke from the line and ran to Abigail, throwing his arms around her waist. You came back, he whispered. I promised I would, she replied softly, gently disentangling his arms. Go with Mrs. Grayson now, everything will be all right. Only when the last child had exited the house did Holloway gesture with his revolver for Abigail to sit in a chair near the fireplace. Brave and foolish, he commented, a dangerous combination. Perhaps, she acknowledged, but necessary sometimes. Your husband understood necessity, Holloway said, pouring himself a drink from a decanter on the mantel while keeping the gun trained on her. He wasn't squeamish about doing what needed to be done to secure our future. Franklin was weak, Abigail replied, surprising herself with the harshness of her assessment. He allowed you to lead him into corruption rather than standing on principle. Holloway laughed again. Principles don't build fortunes, Mrs. Foster. Opportunity does. And those children represented an opportunity too good to pass up. Those opportunities were people's lives, Mr. Holloway, fathers and husbands who died because you cut corners on safety. Children left destitute because you stole what was rightfully theirs. His expression darkened. Spare me your moralizing. In another hour I'll be on my way south with enough money to start over, perhaps in Mexico this time. You won't make it to the border, Abigail said with quiet certainty. Too many people know what you've done now. Thanks to you and that interfering cowboy. Holloway's face twisted with malice. Where is he, I wonder, not the type to let you walk into danger alone? As if summoned by the question, a floorboard creaked in the hallway beyond the parlor. Holloway whirled toward the sound, firing blindly through the doorway. The next moments passed in a blur of noise and motion. Lucas burst through the door, diving low to avoid Holloway's second shot. The two men collided, grappling for control of the revolver. A third shot discharged, shattering a lamp and plunging the room into near darkness. Abigail scrambled to light another lamp, then turned to find Lucas and Holloway still struggling. The revolver had skittered across the floor out of reach, but Holloway had produced a knife from somewhere and was attempting to drive it toward Lucas's throat. Without thinking, Abigail grabbed the heavy decanter from the mantel and brought it down on Holloway's head with all her strength. The crystal shattered and Holloway slumped forward unconscious. Lucas, are you hurt? She knelt beside him, hands frantically checking for wounds. I'm all right, he assured her, catching her hands in his. Thanks to your quick thinking. Sheriff Medlock and his deputies burst in moments later, securing Holloway and checking both Lucas and Abigail for injuries. That was either the bravest or most foolhardy thing I've ever witnessed, Mrs. Foster, the sheriff remarked as he helped them to their feet. Sometimes there's little difference between the two, Lucas said, his arm sliding protectively around Abigail's waist. Outside, they found Mrs. Grayson and the children waiting a safe distance away, surrounded by concerned townspeople who had gathered at the commotion. Daniel broke from the group again, running to Abigail with tear-streaked cheeks. I knew you'd be okay, he declared, though his trembling belied his confidence. I prayed real hard, just like Mrs. Grayson taught us. Abigail knelt to embrace him properly this time. Thank you for those prayers, Daniel. I believe they helped. Over the boy's shoulder, her eyes met Lucas's. The tenderness she saw there warmed her more thoroughly than any fire could have on this cool mountain night. The days that followed brought swift justice to Victor Holloway. With testimony from Jimmy and Sarah about the mine collapse, Rebecca's preserved copies of her father's safety reports, and the damning evidence of the embezzled funds, Judge Harmon ordered Holloway held for trial on multiple serious charges. Few doubted the outcome would be severe, possibly even a hanging offense for the deaths he had caused through negligence. Judge Harmon formally appointed Abigail as trustee of the Restored Orphans Fund, with authority to establish proper housing, education, and care for the children affected by the Silvercrest disaster. The trust, now valued at over $50,000 with the addition of profits from the Colorado silver mine, would provide amply for their needs into adulthood. Lucas accepted the position of deputy sheriff, though he made it clear to Sheriff Medlock that his first priority was ensuring the safety of Mrs. Foster and her charges, as he put it. The sheriff, a practical man, recognized the wisdom of having someone with Lucas's skills focused on protecting the town's most vulnerable residents. Abigail's first act as trustee was to purchase a large property on the outskirts of Pyramid City, a former ranch house with ample bedrooms, surrounding land for gardens and livestock, and plenty of room for children to play and grow. With Mrs. Grayson's continued help as matron, and additional staff now properly compensated, the orphanage was transformed from a place of mere survival to one of nurturing and opportunity. It was on a crisp autumn evening, nearly 3 months after their arrival in Pyramid City, that Lucas asked Abigail to walk with him to the ridge overlooking their new home. The children were settled for the night, the lamps in the large house glowing warmly against the gathering dusk. "Do you regret it?" he asked as they stood watching the last light fade from the western sky. "Leaving Boston, the life you knew," Abigail shook her head without hesitation. "Not for a moment. That life was comfortable but empty, this one." She gestured toward the house below, where 11 orphaned children now slept safely. "This has purpose, meaning." Lucas turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I've been thinking about meaning, purpose, the things that make a life worth living." "Have you?" She teased gently, though her heart had begun to race at his serious tone. "I've drifted most of my life, Abigail, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots, never allowing myself to care too deeply." His thumbs traced circles on the backs of her hands. "But these past months, watching you build something here, not just a home for those children, but a future for them, it's made me want things I never thought I would." "What things?" she asked softly, though she thought she knew the answer from the way his eyes held hers. "A home. A purpose beyond the next job or horizon." He drew a deep breath. "A family of my own." Joy bloomed in Abigail's chest, warm and expanding. "Lucas Wyatt, are you asking me something specific?" He smiled, that rare full smile that transformed his face and made him look younger, unburdened. "I am." Slowly, he lowered himself to one knee, still holding her hands. "Abigail Foster, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife, of building this new life together, not just for those children who need us, but for each other?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation. "Yes, Lucas, 1,000 times yes." When he rose to kiss her, Abigail felt as though every step of her journey from Boston widow to frontier guardian of orphaned children had been leading her to this moment, this man, this purpose they would share. Their wedding, held in the town's small church just before Christmas, was a joyous affair attended by the entire community. The children from the orphanage played special roles, Daniel proudly bearing the rings, the older girls serving as attendants, the boys dressed in their Sunday best and beaming with importance. Judge Harmon performed the ceremony, speaking eloquently about new beginnings, and the family they were creating, not just as husband and wife, but as protectors and guides to the children who had come into their care. When Lucas and Abigail exchanged their vows, pledging to love and cherish one another through whatever life might bring, many in the congregation dabbed at moist eyes. The story of how they had met and what they had accomplished together had become something of a legend in Pyramid City, a tale of justice, courage, and love triumphing over greed and corruption. The celebration afterward, held at the newly established Silvercrest Home for Children, as the orphanage was now called, lasted well into the evening. Neighbors brought food and drink, musicians played for dancing, and the children reveled in the festive atmosphere. Late in the evening, as the party continued around them, Lucas drew Abigail away for a moment of privacy on the porch. "Happy, Mrs. Wyatt?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist. "Completely, Mr. Wyatt." She leaned into his embrace, savoring the strength and tenderness she had come to rely upon. "Though I believe I'm still officially Mrs. Foster until Judge Harmon files the marriage certificate." "A technicality," he murmured against her hair. "In my heart, you became mine the moment you knocked Holloway unconscious with that decanter." Abigail laughed, turning in his arms to face him. "Is that what won your heart, my ability to render a man senseless with barware, among other qualities?" His expression grew more serious. "Your courage, your determination to fight for those children when no one else would, the way you answered when they called." From inside the house came the sound of one of the younger children crying, likely overtired from the day's excitement. "Speaking of which," Abigail said, reluctantly pulling away. Lucas caught her hand. "Together," she nodded, heart full, "together." As they returned to the warmth and light of their home, to the children who had become their family, Abigail reflected on the strange and wonderful path that had brought her here. From a privileged but purposeless existence in Boston to this rich life in a frontier town, surrounded by people who needed her, and a man who loved her for exactly who she was. Later that night, after the guests had departed and the children were finally asleep, Lucas and Abigail stood in the doorway of the boys' dormitory, watching the peaceful slumber of their charges. Daniel, still occasionally troubled by nightmares, stirred in his sleep. "Mama," he murmured, so softly they almost missed it. Without hesitation, Abigail moved to his bedside, smoothing his hair and whispering words of comfort until he settled again. When she returned to Lucas's side, he drew her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You promised you'd answer when they called," he said softly, "and you have, every time." "We both have," she corrected, leaning into his strength, "and we always will." Outside, snow began to fall, covering Pyramid City in a blanket of white that gleamed silver in the moonlight. Within the walls of the Silvercrest home, warmth and love abounded, not just between the newly wedded couple, but extending to each child who had once been lost and was now found, once been forgotten and was now cherished. And if, in the years that followed, the Wyatt family grew to include children of their own, first a son named after Lucas's one childhood friend who had shown him kindness, then twin daughters with their mother's determination and their father's steady courage, the love only multiplied, never divided. For Abigail and Lucas had discovered what truly mattered, not wealth or status or even justice alone, but the creating of a family where every call was answered, every tear acknowledged, every triumph celebrated. Together, they had built something neither could have imagined that fateful day in Tucson when a desperate woman faced down a gunman and a taciturn cowboy decided to intervene. And when visitors to Pyramid City remarked on the unusual family at the Silvercrest home, the former Boston widow, the once drifting cowboy, and the collection of children from varied backgrounds who clearly adored them, both locals, would simply smile knowingly. For they had witnessed the truth that Abigail and Lucas discovered along their journey. That family is not defined by blood, but by belonging, not by circumstance, but by choice, and that the most profound love often grows in the most unexpected places, even in the wild heart of the western frontier.